أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Dear brothers and sisters, we have been explaining the rules of Wudhu. There are a few more issues left that need to be explained. There are certain questions and certain ambiguities regarding the rules of Wudhu, and these ambiguities need to be addressed in one way or the other. For example, if we have offered our prayers and all of a sudden we start entertaining doubt about whether we performed Wudhu or not, what are we going to do? What about if we doubt in the middle of prayer whether we performed Wudhu or not? Again, what is our duty here in this regard? When it comes to the first question, of course, your prayers would be valid, and it's not necessary for you to offer your prayers once again, because you have already offered your prayers. During the prayer you did not have the doubt and you did not entertain doubt. Now the prayer has been offered. It does not make any difference whether the time is left or the time has passed. In both cases your prayers are considered as valid. As far as the time when you doubt, when you are offering prayers, then in that case you cannot continue offering prayers. You have to take action to make Wudhu, to perform ablution, and then offer your prayers. Dear brothers and sisters, if a person is suffering from incontinence, from a serious problem of lacking the control to the ability to control his urine or to control his stomach, this is termed as incontinence in the epistles of Islamic laws. Of course, this is one of the questions normally asked by people, but there are many people who feel shy to ask such questions. So let's assume that there are people who are not in a position to control their urine, and there are people who pass wind every now and then. They cannot control themselves. It is beyond their control. So what is the position in regards to such people? What are they supposed to do? Let me tell you that the rules which are applicable to those people who cannot control their urine are applicable to those people who cannot control their stomach in terms of passing wind. So if you understand the rules of the person who cannot control his urine, then the same rules and the same laws apply to the person who cannot control passing wind during prayers. Dear brothers and sisters, if a person is sure that at some time during the prayer and during the prayer time there will be a respite, during which there will be a restraint, during which he can control himself and he can restrain himself from urine or from making wind, then of course he should perform wudhu and offer the prayers. And if he can control his stomach, or if he can restrain himself for just as short a time as he can offer only the obligatory parts of the prayers, then in this case he should not the recommended parts of the prayers. He should suffice to offering only the obligatory parts of the prayers. He should drop the recommended parts. There is no doubt that if a person is not even able to control, to restrain himself for just 1 minute, or even for that, less than that, and he passes wind every moment, and there is no time, he cannot predict that he can pass wind or he can restrain himself for a while, then in that case, he should perform one wudhu, and one wudhu would be enough. Even if he passes wind in the middle of prayers, even if he urinates in the middle of the prayer, then that wudhu is sufficient. According to some scholars, he can offer 2 prayers with the same wudhu. It's not necessary, of course, to offer only 1 prayer. He can offer 2 prayers with the same wudhu. It's not necessary for him to renew the wudhu. Of course, you need to refer to the scholar, to the mujtahid whom you follow. You have to make your own independent effort and an independent research in this regard. But this is the general rule and the general law, which is normally the majority of religious scholars and religious authorities have stated and the epistles of Islamic laws. Of course, those who suffer from incontinence, those who cannot restrain themselves, they have to wear something. They have to use some cotton or a piece of cloth or something to prevent urine from spreading to other parts of his body, from spreading to his underwear, to his undergarment. The cotton is required, because if he does not use the cotton or maybe a piece of cloth to prevent the urine from spreading, then of course his leg and his trousers will become ritually impure, and in that case he will not be able to offer the prayers. If, as I said, if a person suffers from incontinence, it does not make any difference whether he cannot control his urine or he cannot restrain himself from passing wind. The same rule applies to both of them. And the same rule applies to the person who cannot control his bowel also. He should, of course, go ahead and follow the same prescription and the same rules and the same laws that have been advised and prescribed by religious authorities. Now there is another question, of course, not related to incontinence, but related to a different subject. Of course, related to wudhu, it is in connection with wudhu. The question is, where is wudhu mustahab? Where are we recommended to make wudhu, to perform wudhu? There are a few places and occasions where it is recommended to perform wudhu. Wudhu is recommended for namaz-i-mayyit, for the mayyit prayer, or for the prayer which is offered on a dead body. It is recommended, of course, it's not wajib. It is also recommended to make wudhu when you want to visit graves. If you are going to a cemetery to visit the graves of the graves, then of course it's recommended to offer to make wudu. And also it's recommended to make wudu when you want to enter a mosque. It does not make any difference what mosque you want to enter. When you want to enter a mosque, it is recommended to make wudu before entering the mosque. And of course, the same rule applies to the time when you want to enter the shrines of one of the infallibles. If you want to enter the shrine of any of the imams, then it's recommended to make wudu, to perform wudu. Also, the scholars and religious authorities have said that if you want to go to bed, it is always recommended to make wudu before going to bed. Performing wudu is recommended. It is mustahab before going to bed. Unfortunately, there are some people who wrongly and maybe naively believe that performing wudu before going to, for example, a mosque or before going to bed is wajib. No, it's not wajib. It is only recommended. And of course, if someone has performed wudu for any one of the above purposes, for any of the purposes mentioned, then that wudu can suffice for prayers, for any prayers. If you have performed wudu with the intention to enter a mosque, but then all of a sudden, or maybe after a few minutes, after a few hours, the time for prayers arrived, it is not necessary to renew your wudu. It is not necessary to make wudu again. That wudu which was recommended, the mustahab wudu, is sufficient for the obligatory prayers also. There is no need, it's not necessary for you to change or to renew the wudu. That wudu which you had performed is sufficient. Now, another question which is also very important, of course, is when and what does invalidate or what invalidates the wudu? You are in a state of ritual purity. You are in a state of wudu. You are in the state of tahara. You can perform prayers, you can offer, you can do any acts which require wudu. Now, what are the things that make wudu void? What are the agents that invalidate the wudu? There are 7 things and 7 agents that invalidate wudu. One of them is passing of urine. Passing of urine invalidates wudu. There is no doubt about it. And the second is excretion, defecation, and releasing oneself. That also makes wudu void. And the third agent is passing wind from the rear, from behind. This is the third invalidating agent, of course. And the fourth invalidating agent is asleep. Asleep, of course, that should be deep enough to restrict sight and hearing. Now, sometimes you take a nap and you do not go to a fast sleep. You are conscious, you are aware of the movements around you. That kind of sleep will not invalidate wudu. Of course, the sleep should be deep enough to restrict the eyesight and the hearing. In that case, of course, your wudu would be made void. And the fifth invalidating agent is things on account of which a person loses his sensibility. For example, a person becomes insane, or a person drinks alcohol, he goes drunk, intoxicants, he drinks intoxicants, wine, for example. All of a sudden, he changes into a human being who is drunk, who is insane. And of course, unconsciousness is also in the same category. If a person becomes unconscious, or if a person becomes insane, or maybe a person becomes drunk in the sense that he loses his consciousness, in that case his wuzu is made void. And the next, of course, invalidating agent is istihada. A woman who enters the state of istihada should, of course, make wudu. And of course, there are different kinds of istihada, different occasions and different examples for istihada. There we have little istihada, medium istihada, and excessive istihada. Different types of istihada have different rulings and different applications, different actually rules that need to be taken into consideration. And of course, when we talk of wudu in regards to istihada, we mean the little istihada or the less istihada, of course. The seventh invalidating agent is janaba. Of course, janaba requires ghusl. But this is one of the invalidating agent. And a person in the state of janaba is not relieved of the obligation to offer prayers. So he must offer prayers. But if he was in the state of wudu and he enters the state of janaba, then of course he is considered to be impure. And a person in the state of impurity and a person in the state of janaba should, of course, perform ghusl, not wudu. There are many people who believe that they have to make wudu also after janaba, after performing ghusl janaba. Of course, ghusl janaba is always sufficient for wudu. It always suffices for wudu. It's enough for wudu. When you have performed ghusl janaba, then it's not necessary to make wudu. And if you perform wudu, the wudu would not be needed. It is excessive, it is additional, and it will not be counted because you are already in the state of wudu. Of course, if you were in the state of janaba and you did something that invalidated the ritual purity, you did, for example, after performing ghusl janaba, you went to the bathroom, or you passed wind. In that case, you need to make wudu, and that ghusl will not suffice. But of course, there is no doubt that your ghusl has been counted. It's not necessary to do the ghusl once again. And it's always not necessary for you to keep yourself in the state of ritual purity or to restrain yourself from passing wind. If you are in a difficult position where you need to release yourself, it is not necessary, it is not recommended to keep yourself in a difficult position. You have to relieve yourself. You have to go to the bathroom, or if you need to pass wind, that should be done, because in the time of prayer, you should not have any problem. You should concentrate, you should focus your attention to the dhikr, to the recitals, and to the words and the verses which you recite during prayers. So, an obligatory ghusl is always sufficient for wudu. Of course, there are different scholars, there are different mujtahideen. There are some scholars, of course, who believe that ghusl hayd, for example, or ghusl istihada, for example, are not sufficient for wudu. The only ghusl or the only major ablution that is sufficient for wudu is ghusl janaba. Of course, again, there is a controversy, again there is a difference of opinion among the scholars. Some scholars even believe that even a recommended ghusl, a mustahab ghusl, such as ghusl jum'ah, is sufficient for wudu. Any ghusl which has been proven or which is proven to be recommended is sufficient for wudu. It could be ghusl jum'ah or ghusl that you perform before on the night of Qadr, or any type of ghusl that has been proven and substantiated to be recommended. That ghusl is sufficient for wudu. This is according to some scholars like Ayatollah Sistani. He says that recommended and wajib ghusl, all of them are sufficient for wudu. But you, of course, need to investigate for yourself. You need to go to the scholars and to the mujtahideen whom you follow, and you have to act according to the rules and verdicts of those scholars. I should tell you again that the rules are not very much different. The difference is not very huge, and there is very little difference between the fatwas of the religious authorities and the ground scholars. There is one thing more to add in regards to janaba. The question arises as to how janaba may take place. How does a person enter the state of janaba? This, of course, can be discussed within the rules regarding ghusl janaba. Of course, tomorrow we will elaborate further on the rules regarding ghusl janaba, of course. But just to make a few points clear here is that janaba, it takes place or occurs either through sexual intercourse or through ejaculation. There is no doubt that if a person has had sexual intercourse, he and the woman both of them should perform ghusl janaba. In case a woman has ejaculated, or a man has ejaculated, either by legal means or through illegal means, through illicit means, it does not make any difference. He must make ghusl. There are many people asking questions about masturbation. Masturbation is one of the major sins, it's one of the great sins which you have to avoid. But of course, if you have masturbated, it is necessary for you to perform ghusl. Otherwise, you cannot offer prayers. There are many people who do not know the rules of masturbation. They do not know the rules regarding masturbation. Masturbation is a great sin. It's a great mistake on the part of the person who masturbates. In case a person masturbates, then he must repent, and repentance is a gate to forgiveness. It is a gate to divine mercy. And if you repent, of course, God is all forgiving, God is merciful, God is compassionate. He forgives the sinner. No matter how large or how big the sin may be, God has promised to forgive the person who repents sincerely, who repents genuinely. Now, if a person has masturbated, he must perform ghusl and he must purify himself. Okay, his garments, his body do not become impure insofar as they have not reached semen, insofar as his body has not reached impurity. But if it has reached impurity, if his body has reached the semen or come into contact with semen, then of course that part of the body needs to be washed. And there is one thing, when you perform ghusl, of course, it's not necessary to purify yourself, to wash the parts of your body that have come in contact with semen or urine beforehand. No. When you perform ghusl, of course, then you can do it at the time of performing ghusl. And it's not necessary, and as I said in wudhu, of course, it's necessary to clean all parts of wudhu. And before performing wudhu, all parts of wudhu need to be clean. But when it comes to ghusl, it's not necessary to do this. You can just wash yourself during wudhu and purify yourself when you are performing ghusl. Dear brothers and sisters, a person, as I said, enters the state of janaba in two ways: sexual intercourse and discharge of semen. And it does not make any difference whether a person discharges semen through illicit means, or when he is sleeping, or when he is awake, or if he discharges little semen or more semen. And of course, there are some signs through which we can distinguish, through which we can discern whether a person or the person himself, he is discharged semen or not. One is that the semen, one of the signs is that the semen or the discharge should take place with force. The semen should be thrown out with force. And then the body should be slackened. The person who ejaculates should feel that his body is slackened. This is one of the signs. The first sign is, of course, is that it should be thrown out. If the fluid is thrown out and the body is slackened, then in this case, you can consider the fluid as semen. And in that case, also, sometimes, of course, there is a term, normally they say pre-cum. The pre-cum is not impure. It is the liquid that comes out when a person feels some kind of sexual excitement, or when then he feels that there is some kind of liquid on his organ. That liquid is not impure, and that liquid does not invalidate wudhu. So if it comes out, wudhu would be valid. It will not render your body and your clothes impure also. So that is totally pure. And there is nothing you should do, there is nothing to do. You can treat it and consider it as pure. Of course, there are some other rules which we will discuss. Inshallah, in the next session, we will discuss the rules of ghusl. And in that session, of course, we will further elaborate on the rules related to ejaculation and related to discharge of semen. We will discuss when, for example, ghusl becomes obligatory, ghusl janabat, and when it does not become obligatory, of course. These are the rules that will be explained in the next session, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.